Olivia.
Guess what we're talking about today?
You guessed it.
The Civil War! The Civil War was a series of battles fought against the North and South.
I strongly agree.
1865, the North and South fought for their freedom.
Through years of battling, the Union succeeded and won the Civil War, leaving the Confederacy to fall.
Now let's get right into the video.
During the presidential election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln addressed to everyone that his main goal as president would be to keep the U.S. together and to keep slavery from spreading in the states. In return, this helped him win the election. But as much as Lincoln talked about preserving the states, the South, which would be Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana, they wanted the exact opposite. The South argued that it had the right to succeed because without the freedom to own slaves, their economy would fall apart. But even with this, Lincoln saw that having the right to own a person was morally wrong, and that he would do everything in his power to preserve, protect, and defend the government and the U.S. Of this argument, the Civil War began spring of 1861. During the course of the war, it was clear to see that the Union had more money based off of their more newer manufacturing. In almost every area possible, the North produced more than the South. The North also had the upper hand when it came to transportation. They made a way that railroads could be used as a fast way to get anything that the Union needed, whether it was soldiers, food, or weapons. At the beginning of the war, Lincoln's main focus was to keep the states together. But as the war went on, him and all the North agreed that slavery would be put to an end. Abraham Lincoln presented the Emancipation Proclamation 2 years after the war had started, which freed all Southern slaves and quickly rippled into freeing all slaves across the U.S. This act made it even harder for the South because it resulted in the North having more soldiers than they expected.
Bye. In the 1800s, slavery became very popular in the United States. Slaves were heavily relied on to do hard labor for their owners and families. Many worked out on the fields, but those who worked inside homes received better treatment. Enslaved people lived in shacks with dirt floors. They were poorly fed and as a result suffered from malnutrition. No matter what condition the slaves were in, they had to work. For example, if a slave was pregnant, disabled, or elderly, they were forced to work In many states, slave codes were created. The code forbids slave owners to teach their slaves and stated that slaves can't meet without owner's permission. Slave owners thought that if they would let their slaves marry, they are less likely to run away. Since enslaved people outnumbered those in the South, the whites feared that they would revolt. Denmark Vesey, an African American who purchased his way out of slavery, became a preacher. Vesey organized a revolt consisting of 9,000 African Americans, but then was caught in 1812 and 35 of his followers were hung. Furthermore, in 1831, Nat Turner revolted by killing more than 60 people, including his owner, along with the family. To put down the revolt, slave owners killed 100 enslaved people. While people were frightened by these events and believed that slavery was the only way to control African Americans. However, not all African Americans were enslaved, for many in the North had jobs. They also owned homes, businesses, and land. Though they seemed to have more freedom in the North rather than in the South, many places were segregated, which meant that there were assigned areas for whites and blacks. Segregation lasted up until the mid-1900s. Schools became integrated. In conclusion, many slaves suffered from hostile treatment from their owners, but in the end, received the freedom that they deserved.
Next. The impact of the Civil War left many changes for the United States. During the war, slavery started to fall apart. Many African Americans and runaway slaves joined the Union Army. They did not only free themselves, but their families became free as well. Also, the Emancipation Proclamation was also issued, in which permanently outlawed slavery in all areas of the United States. After the war, there was 4 million newly freed African Americans in the United States. In addition, the South was completely destroyed for railroads, crops, barns, and homes, which were all destroyed by the Union. The Union Army left the South in devastation, and they punished the South for their disloyalty to the United States.
Furthermore, the federal government gained more power. At the beginning, the federal government believed in states' rights and also thought that the South had the right to secede from the Union. In the end, the federal government ideas shifted and they began to play a bigger role in the lives of individual citizens. Lastly, at the end of the Civil War, many people moved to the United States and the industries grew bigger. The South had to adapt to changes, and former slaves, enslaved people, had to face the responsibility of freedom. There was now a larger federal government that had to protect the rights of citizens. In conclusion, the lives of Americans would never be the same.
Never be the same.
Never
ever.
be the same. And that's
Bye.
our video.
That's it. Now you know about the Civil War.
Yeah, now you know. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.